are Mary and Claire. Mary Morris is the director of the Baltimore Economic Development Fund, and Claire Broido Johnson is president and founder of CBJ Energy. So welcome, ladies. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Of course. Very excited about the topic today. So maybe we can start out just by having each of you tell our members a little bit about how you are currently involved with emerging companies as a good first place to start. Mary, if you want to kind of kick it off for us.
Sure. Thanks so much, Susan. I'm very pleased to be here today. So my background is actually in economic development. I've been working in this field at various levels in Maryland over a number of years, at the state level, the county level, the regional level. But I've also always specialized in entrepreneurship and innovation and technology commercialization. I routinely work with entrepreneurs and companies at the earliest stages to help them locate resources and position them for growth. And specifically, the Baltimore Fund is a program that finances early stage university system of Maryland, as well as Morgan State and St. Mary's as the public higher education institutions in the state, locate, grow, and expand in Baltimore City. And as part of that, we also do quite a bit of programming and outreaching and connections into the innovation and commercialization ecosystem. And I too am a cashed out entrepreneur, so I've got that side as well.
Terrific.
Great. And my name's Claire. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Sounds great.
Thank goodness. Okay, great. My name is Claire Broido Johnson. I am the president and CEO of CBJ Energy, but more importantly, I am currently the chief operating officer of a company called Inspiration Mobility that does electric vehicle fleet leasing and charging installations. The way that I'm involved with startups is I have been the founder, CEO, COO, president of 8 startups now, all in the climate tech space. I have been based in Baltimore since 2002. I originally came here after business school to work at Constellation and have been super involved with a bunch of different startups ever since. I also spent 3 years at the University of Maryland working with Mary at a fund called the Maryland Momentum Fund, funded by the University System of Maryland to invest in early stage startups, where I invested in 32 startups, not just climate tech, but across the board. So I'm sort of 3 parts here. One is as a current C-level person at a startup and having been at 8 now in the climate tech space. Second, because I ran a fund just for Maryland-based companies. And third, I'm also a personal investor in a large portfolio of early stage startups myself. Happy to be here. Thanks.
We are obviously in very good hands between the two of you, so it should be a good discussion today. Mary, maybe we can start out with you, just given your work closely with so many emerging companies. Why don't you share with our members some of the specific needs that you see from companies at this stage of their development?
Sure. And I do start working with companies right from the idea concept stage through to watching them grow and supporting their growth. And frequently you'll find that I say that your entrepreneur, your innovator has a very good knowledge of a specific technology, industry, or their sector. But what they don't have is they don't have experience with management, marketing, product market fit, HR, managing their business. And they don't have a really good connection into other resources available, whether that be those professional services or potential customers, or any of those types of things, resources that would help them grow, and even the knowledge that could be gained by interacting with other experienced entrepreneurs and innovators. That's one of the things. And money. There's always money. There's funding resources that they're looking for. And those can take all types of, I know we'll get into that later, but all types of different funding, non-dilutive resources, grant resources, potential customers is another source of revenue, as well as investment income.
Okay, great. I should ask, because I am a member, as I mentioned, of the Women on Board, specifically committee of EA. So I got to ask this. How do accomplished women like our members, of which we have many, that have just a lot of great skills and experience that we could use to help these organizations? So how do accomplished women like that, who have such a great thing to offer, how do they get involved on the boards of these startup and emerging companies?
Yes, this is something I find is very important. As I said, usually these entrepreneurs, they got great insight into one specific area that they are very skilled at. And they can use that assistance. So I think that seeking out these smaller boards is, first of all, a great way to leverage your way into a larger board, and interacting with people through spaces that would be of interest to you. One good way would be to interact with your university alma mater. University of Maryland College Park has the Dingman Angels program. That's a great way to get to know. Volunteer to be a pitch competition judge, or volunteer to be an entrepreneur in residence, and meet these entrepreneurs through other ways that they're trying to do outreach. Go to some of TEDCO's events. Upsurge is another Baltimore-based entity. Go to their events. Go to Salisbury's pitch competition and meet people that way, or else get involved in an industry sector that is of personal interest to you. It might not be the industry sector that you represent for your professional job, but maybe you have a distinct interest in diversity, equity, and inclusion activities. Work with that, or working in a sector in Baltimore City or something of that. You can also volunteer to be like a TEDCO venture mentor, or work with Xbox. There's a company, XPX, that does a lot of early stage companies, or go through the tech councils and start meeting people that way. I think it's very important that when you're selecting the type of board you want to be on, it needs to be something that's important to you. Claire mentioned that she's worked in the energy field. That's something that's always been interesting to her. Make sure it's something that you feel that is important to your background.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you were throwing out a lot of different resources there. So I just want to let our members and the participants on today's webinar know that we will include a list of these resources available to you either in the chat or in a follow-up email. And then I know one quick question, we didn't specifically discuss it as we were kind of putting together this webinar, but I wanted to ask it now as part of the conversation. At what stage do these companies typically formalize a board? Or are they just kind of picking and choosing some people that they may know as like an ad hoc resource, and then at some point in time they'll transition into actually formalizing a board? Do you have a sense of that, Mary?
I'll take that. I'll take that one if that's okay, Mary. Which is just, it really depends on the capabilities and the competence of that company. Oftentimes they're so early stage they don't even know that they need a board. And it really depends, ladies, on what your skill sets are and what you're most interested in providing. If you've got sort of the contextual background of that particular industry, they might need you for connections or people that they want to sell a product to. If they need operations support and you're an operations expert or an FP&A expert, they might need that help. But typically early stage companies, especially those that are pre-commercialization, don't even understand that they need a board. So I think, to follow on to Mary's response to your last question, I think in terms of how do you find companies to be on the board of, it really takes a little bit of internal reflection to think about what you want to add. And are you interested? I mean, most of these early stage startups do not have compensation, or if they do, it's a very small percentage of equity. And there's some standard form documents that I can share with any of you about, what equity you might receive, which of course is worth nothing until it's worth a lot. And that is, once in a million. So it's really like a function of thinking through, where do you want to add value and what do you personally want to get out of it? Is it that you want some sort of financial remuneration? Is it that you just want to give back to your community and you really like the founder? I'm happy to talk about why I have joined the boards that I've joined and why I've invested in the companies I've invested in. But it really is a personal decision. And those companies often don't even know that they need a board. So it's someone like you reaching out and saying, I need to help you. Here's exactly how I'm going to help you.
And that's a great point, Claire. I mean, very often board positions will start as advisor positions. And usually the first board for an emerging company will be a collection of their advisors. And as they mature and grow through the funding cycle, it'll become more formalized and structured.
Yeah. Yeah, Claire, if you want to just talk a little bit about, some of your specific involvement, as you just mentioned, and then maybe, since I know that you are active in the space as an investor, you can talk to us more about some of those do's and don'ts when it comes to being involved at this stage of the game.
Sure. I mean, it becomes a very personal decision. So I'll share my journey with you, which is that I'm an environmental scientist by background and have been really passionate about climate change and what we do about climate change. And so I worked at Enron back in its heady days and helped them finance their first wind turbines down in Houston, went back to business school. There was no Enron to go back to, so I wound up at Constellation. And then I founded my first company, Sun Edison, which invented the idea of a power purchase agreement, quasi-leasing model for the solar industry, which ended up being a very successful startup. And I've done a variety of startups since then in energy efficiency, solar energy operations. I'm now working in electric vehicles, but all my thread is typically climate tech. The way that I invest and the way that I get involved in boards is really pretty simple. I typically invest in women-founded companies because that's something that's really important to me personally. I really love mentoring female entrepreneurs. Having been one, I have been the only woman in the room for decades and decades and decades. And I want to support younger women who are starting their startups because I feel like I have a lot of learnings I can share. So 3/4 of the companies I've personally invested in have been female founded. And then I also invest in, and they are all climate tech based, but for one. And I make investments and get involved in boards when there's something really specific that I find intellectually stimulating, where I can actually personally make a difference. So I have an operations and project finance background. And so if there's like a really interesting play where I feel like, oh, they're missing this level of operations, and this is something that I specifically, and maybe not uniquely, but I can specifically add value to, that's something I'm both going to invest in and be on the board of. So as an example, I'm an advisor and now investor in a company called Kanin Energy, Kanin, which does waste to heat energy production. It's a female entrepreneur who's in her mid-30s, who's just a badass project financer. And I love her and I want her to be wildly successful. And so I meet her very regularly about personal issues, professional issues, everything in between. And I wish I had a mentor like that when I was starting my first companies. And so that's where I want to personally add value. But for all of you on the call, maybe you're an FP&A expert, and there's a startup that has a ton of potential, but really has no accounting support and really just doesn't understand it. And you spending, say, 10 hours would, dramatically change how the company goes forward and, maybe invoices more productively or funds more productively. It's really, dependent on what you're most interested in. Going back to the question of where do you find these companies, at the end of this call, I know the lovely ladies who have organized this call will send a variety of resources that we shared with them, but I'm also happy to talk with any of you about how to find startups that meet what you're looking for.
And how about some of those don'ts? So you mentioned some do's. Pick something you're passionate about, something you're already interested in. Look for the skill sets that you have that might add value to this specific organization. So those are some of the things we should do. How about some of the things you shouldn't do?
So I think be also very, very clear about what your risk appetite is. And what I mean by that is sort of your professional risk tolerance and risk appetite, and then your investor personal risk appetite. So there is a huge continuum of startups. A lot of the folks that Mary looks at University of Maryland, Baltimore or beyond, they're pre-commercialization. They're looking at really early stage, need 501, you need a ton of federal funding, state funding, in order to even see whether or not this potential drug has an opportunity to be successful. And that's like a 12-year horizon before anything really interesting happens. If you are a healthcare professional and you find that super interesting, that's great. Personally, I'm never going to invest in that. I don't have a healthcare background. I don't see how I'm going to add value, and I'm not interested in that level of risk. But, we have plenty of women who do that. And that's a really fundamentally, really critical thing. And if you get involved early enough, you can make a lot of money off of it, because you could get some early stage stock. And if you're a regulatory expert, or you have those finance skills, or you have, C-level skills and can help bring on the right staff, that's something that's super valuable for early stage companies. So the don't invest in something where your risk profile is completely different than that company.
Okay, that's always good advice, I think.
Yeah, I think that's always a good advice.
Right.
But I think, one of the things that I find, not just with women, but all humans, is that they typically don't dig enough into the guts of the company to figure out what the risks are. And so, I have a series of questions that I always ask companies to sort of get to the bottom of that, because I think a lot of people join a board thinking, oh, I have the skill set, I can be super helpful. And then you don't realize, like, oh my gosh, this company is really far away from what I actually thought they were able to do.
Yeah. So those lists of questions, is this like 5 questions or 25 questions?
Probably 10.
Okay.
Something like that. Yeah. And it includes, sort of what is your product market fit? Who are your competitors? And anytime an investor said, anytime an early stage startup says they don't have a competitor, I run away kicking and screaming, because everyone has a competitor always. The competition is the status quo, not doing anything. Okay. So it's really having a really good understanding of whether or not the founder is grounded and practical and humble and willing to listen. So, my questions really have to do with the founder and my ability to work with the founder, and whether there's a product market fit. So is there a real interest and demand for whatever product or service this entity is creating? And, have they done their due diligence on the market, and whether or not this is something that has the possibility of being successful. And then even that,
is it realistic?
Is it realistic?
Yeah.
That's terrific. Terrific, ladies. Thank you. Let me switch gears a little bit, and this is probably directed more toward Claire. So how do you actually go about, we'll talk some tactics. How do you go about investing in these companies? Do you invest in them directly? Do people invest in them via a fund? Do they create their own fund? How do we go about
Great question. Yep. Again, very personal. I'll tell you what I've decided and why, and it's worked very productively for me. So I've created my own trust, a revocable trust. So I have the Claire Broido Johnson Trust, and that's how I invest in my startups. I separate my funding. So, and then, I'm married and talk to my wealth management advisor, and my husband, talking about risks. He is an incredibly risk averse human. He's an actuary for a life insurance company. And so we could not be more different from that perspective.
There you go.
And you have to talk to the people in your family as well. So, we agree upon allocating a certain amount of money every year towards these startups. He often doesn't want to know anything about them. He'll ask like 5 questions and then say, sure, go ahead. Because it's always stuff that I know a lot about, and I feel like I'm not only going to invest in it if it makes sense, but to the risk point, I've had 2 really big failures in the last 3 years where I've gotten none of my money back. And so you have to be prepared for that and really expect that. That is much more than the norm, than the exception. I mean, more likely than not, you will lose all of your money. And this is the risk game, right? I mean, and even if you think the idea is fabulous and you love the founder and you think the macroeconomy is perfect and the idea makes a lot of sense and it's reasonable and they're practical, oftentimes, most startups fail. So being reasonable with that is also important. I don't know if I've answered your question. Is that?
I mean, definitely public investing versus private investing, two completely different animals, both unique unto their own right, but you approach them differently. So you go about investing, you've created your own trust to do this type of investing. So is that what most people do? Do they join a fund that's already together? Do they get a whole bunch of their friends who are also interested in the same thing and then they do it?
So I would not suggest creating a fund because there are a jillion funds. And again, ladies on the call, you will get a list from us of funds in the region. I think it's time consuming and not productive to create your own fund, join another fund. There are either funds or just communities that share deal flow. And I personally enjoy that a lot because I learn, it's the intellectual stimulation of learning, well, wow, I really don't know a lot of waste management. And this other person who's planning on investing is investing in this waste management company. Let me learn from that person, and they're putting their money where their mouth is. Maybe I should try to do so too. So I don't suggest investing or creating your own fund because there are a lot of funds out there regionally that you can just bolt yourself onto. There's also the issue of K1s. So you get a K1 for every startup you're a part of. And I can let you know now that if you start investing in startups, you will always be submitting your taxes late. You never get a K1 on time from a startup. So I'm always submitting my taxes at the last second on October 14th because they never do. So if you are uncomfortable with that, you really shouldn't be investing in startups.
Well, and I think you bring up a good point too, Claire, about the other funds though, in that by investing in a fund, an established fund, you can leverage their expertise. And it's a great entry point. And you can also pick an affinity group that's in line with your values.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
And it also minimizes risk a little bit because you're leveraging other people's expertise and you're a small part of something bigger. That's
a really good point. Yep.
And oftentimes they have, different accounting structures and they can help push to make sure you get your K1 in time, and there's investment documents. I don't know how many of you, it looked like on this list, there are quite a lot of lawyers on this call, but you need to be comfortable with whatever the investment document is. And again, I much prefer not investing as an individual, but as a trust because there's a little separation of that risk. And frankly, I don't want people to have access to all of my personal information.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I guess we can kind of stay on that same logistics theme here. If someone wants to start investing in this space, how much money is it going to take? I'm assuming that there is a minimum amount of money where it's just not going to be worth all the hassle associated with it. Perhaps there's not really a cap on the upside, I would imagine, but probably a cap on the minimum side. And then also, can anyone do it? Or do you need to meet a certain criteria as an investor?
So you can invest as little as $10,000. It really is just how much you want to spend time on the paperwork. You can become an advisor without investing anything at all. And, as an advisor or a board member, you typically should ask for some level of equity. It really depends on the stage of the company and who else is investing and how much they've received in terms of investment dollars. But you can invest as little as $10,000. You can invest millions and millions of dollars. Oftentimes, not always, you need to answer the question, are you an accredited investor? And a lot of companies that are a bit more organized will ask if you're an accredited investor before they allow you to invest. And I'm happy to let you answer that question about but it's typically you have more than X million dollars to invest and you maybe answer that question, but you can look up what is an accredited investor and you basically just say, mark a box that says I'm an accredited investor. There's no formal process you have to go through. You just say that you are one and then they believe you.
Yeah. Do you ever have anyone invest via their qualified retirement plans versus just outright money out of curiosity?
I really don't know about that myself. I've never done that.
Okay. And then how do they source the opportunities? So Mary mentioned a couple different options. Are there other options for how they would source it? I mean, the two of you are very connected in this space. Not all of our women are. So how would they go about actually finding all these different, you mentioned a bunch of funds, but how do they go about finding those funds, for example, that are already existing?
Sure, and I think you just got a question about the same thing or something similar, which is, where do you find this? So there is, in the chat, there's a list of angel investors in the area. Resilient Earth Capital, just as an example, just go to their website and say, I'm interested in learning more. And that's a community, that's not a fund. So they're not helping you with the accounting, and they're not collectively investing, but they're doing, as a community, they are doing due diligence put together. There's a group called Gaingels, GAINGELS, that started investing in LGBTQ and underrepresented founder companies, where you can literally just say, I'm interested, and you start getting deal flow. Really depends on if you are interested in something really regional or national. You know, are particularly interested in climate tech or, you know, basket weaving or whatever. There's always a group for you. I mean, some of it is just doing Google searches and trying to find, you know, investment groups. One that I like a lot that's very big and national is called Next Gen Venture Partners. Was bought by Brown Advisory recently, based in Baltimore. And you can become a quote unquote advisor, which I am. There's a huge list of advisors now, but then you have access to a variety of startup companies, and you can click in about what you're particularly interested in or not. And sometimes they call you and say, because you're an expert in ABC, we want you to do some due diligence for us. Jill asked, how many pitches do you listen to versus how many investments you have? 500 to 10. So what is that? I mean, hundreds and hundreds forever. Well, let's see. Yeah, I mean, a lot. Look at a lot of pitches.
That is a lot.
Yeah. I mean, this is not, it's not like a here and there, try to think about it. It's really, if you want to make good decisions, you have to spend a lot of time on it.
And so I guess this is probably, Claire, one of the areas where investing with an established fund might get you a little bit closer to that, so you don't have to go to that level of due diligence on everything yourself. If our ladies are professional women, they're holding C-level positions, they're busy individuals. So yeah, that seems like that might be a pretty good way to go to help cut down on the quantity of time to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your your prince or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, probably 50 to 1, something like that.
It's a lot of time.
Yeah, it's a lot of time. I mean, and of course you can just, decide you want to invest in a friend, that, you can make your own decisions about that, but it only helps to look at lots more. And as Mary had mentioned, the university systems have all sorts of things. There's a bunch of incubators, accelerators around here, where you can start being involved. And if all you're interested in doing is like trying to support startups locally, there's a group called Conscious Venture Lab, which is like fantastic. It's a 12-week accelerator program for early stage companies. And it's in downtown Baltimore, and it's purpose-driven companies, and you can start becoming a mentor if you're not quite ready to figure out whether or not you want to invest. And that would enable you to find lots and lots of companies and see what's interesting to you. There's so many different people and so many different investment groups. There's an investment group called Blue Ventures, BLU Ventures. You'll see there's incredibly few women on that group. And we could talk about that, but they invest in early stage B2B, software as a service, and cyber. Maybe that's interesting to you. I mean, for every person who wants to invest, there are a jillion of groups that would be happy to have you invest your money.
But I do think that this advisor, mentor, volunteer role is really probably the logical first step to entering this industry, because you'll meet other people that are more experienced investors, and you'll start to know this community as you volunteer for this. I mean, Techstars is located in Baltimore. You can do that. There's so many different avenues where you can, BW Tech has some outreach opportunities. Maryland Tech Council has some. I mean, there's just so many. And as you mentioned, Susan, the other thing is you could invest in more of a routine lifestyle type business among somebody you're just not going to get the returns on those that you would see on something more sophisticated.
Great. I love that train of thought, so I'm going to go there in a second, but I also wanted to mention, I do know Innovation Works Baltimore.
Yep.
We support them organizationally. That's one of the companies or organizations that our firm supports. And they do a lot of great work with individuals starting up, businesses in those underserved communities. So that's pretty exciting. And Mary, something you mentioned, and I guess this can go to either of you, but I did have a question on just what's investable here in the Maryland community. And really, how do we better understand the risk of these type of investments, setting the right expectations for ourselves, particularly if we're new to this space? So this could be for either or both of you. Mary,
both of us probably make sense.
Okay.
Go ahead first, Mary, please. Yeah.
So one of the beauties of being in Maryland is that we have a wide variety of things that are investable in our area. Things that are typically more product oriented, have a faster go-to-market strategy, and might be an entry-level point. Things that are more complex, that have regulatory aspects to it, such as the life sciences, some cyber fields, have a longer view, are riskier, because at any time you could hit that stop and things will turn quickly. And so you need to think about that as well. Innovation Works is a great example. Those are more of your product-oriented, lifestyle-oriented investments that have the potential to grow huge. I mean, you think more of the Shark Tank products, even though that's a very unrealistic viewpoint of actual investing.
But that's what some people think about. So that's why we have you here to keep it real for us.
But as the complexity of the company increases, the risk increases, the return time period increases. But like I said, being in Maryland, there is so many different avenues that you could look at too. Claire?
Tons of different avenues. I think it's just a matter of figuring out what you really want and how much time you want to allocate. Because again, there's so many things and what you want to spend your time on. Another organization that I highly suggest you all take a look at is Upsurge Baltimore. Mary and I are both on the board, and they are all about making Baltimore an equitable technology organism. So how do we support underrepresented founders in the technology space? And how do we bring underrepresented founders to the Baltimore market to start their companies here? And so it just fundamentally depends on what you care about and what you want to spend your time on.
And what you can add. Yeah, Upsurge, UPSURGE. And one of the nice things about Upsurge is not only is it locally based, and they do have access to the Techstars, but you show up at Guilford Hall almost every Tuesday at 6 o'clock, you're going to meet some entrepreneurs and some people in the support organization.
Yeah, if you look up
it's in there, Sam.
It's in there. Okay, perfect. Yep. Perfect.
So that is a good way to get access. And like I said, Digman Angels down near DC, there's a number of these entities, and TEDCO is always looking for people to be network advisors.
Okay. And when you're getting involved with these organizations, either of you, the organizations where you're not just investing like an outside investor, but you're actually getting involved in this, our ladies, as I mentioned, they're professional ladies with full-time jobs, but with skills and obviously a passion for giving back. So what does that look like from a time commitment when you're involved with an organization like that? Are we talking a couple hours a month? Are we talking many, many hours a month realistically? Because that's what it needs. Is this something that you have a lot of control over?
Yeah.
Is it something you don't?
It's one of the first questions you should ask before you join a board is how often, what do they exactly mean? So I'm on the board of Living Classrooms Foundation, for example, which is not a startup, but is and I spend, quite a lot of time helping them with the finance committee and a bunch of other things, but in some of the boards I'm on, I spend 5 hours a year. I'm on the advisory board of a fund called Clean Feed Investors. I spend 20 hours a month on it. It's really dependent, and I would be really clear and upfront at the very beginning, as all of you women I'm sure are, about what time you can and cannot allocate, because depending on the organization, they will suck you dry and try to get as much from you as possible, which is exactly what they should do as startups. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually just down to Living Classrooms. Ladies, if you haven't been there, it's super cool. Definitely a really cool place to be. And
Yeah.
Claire and I did not coordinate that in advance. Just
not at all.
no.
No.
It is, but that's a great point that how much it varies greatly.
Yeah.
And being clear about what you can. But I think you'll find that if there's something that really speaks to one of your passions or areas of interest, you're going to be wanting to spend more time and commit more time. I mean, I know that there's a group of entrepreneurs in the Baltimore region who are all veterans, and they have coffee once a month because they're all founders, they're all veterans, they have a lot to talk about, and they learned a lot, and they're at different stages of growth. And it's really helpful to all of them. I know, the younger ones depend highly on the more experienced and back and forth. So just finding that niche that works for you and engages you.
That's terrific, especially since we just had Veterans Day. So that's awesome. We did get a question. This is another one that I hadn't fully prepared, but since I have a little bit of time, I think I'll throw it out there. Are there any opportunities for debt and equity investment vehicles? And what are the risk rewards for both types of those investments on the debt and equity side? If you know.
I mean, it really, again, I'm not trying to not answer the question.
Yep.
Typically, if you're joining as an advisor or you're joining as a board member, they want your cash. It's not debt. And so it really, you're investing in equity. Unless the startup is a finance structured startup in some way, they're not interested in debt at all.
Okay.
Ever.
Okay.
Actually, no one's ever asked that question, not once.
Okay.
So I mean, people want your cold hard cash.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense for companies at that stage of the game versus having another loan on the books, possibly.
Well,
That's
and
the
I
very
would
last thing you
advise,
want.
yeah, and I would advise my early stage companies, I was like, look for, non-dilutive first.
Okay.
So, I mean, one of the nice things about the Baltimore Fund is we give conditional grants and looking at SBIRs and looking at other types of grant resources to get you going, and then start trading equity for cash to keep going and avoid the debt as much as you can, unless you have a dedicated source of income for short term, just as you would tell your kids with their first credit card.
Yeah.
Don't borrow more than you can pay off.
Yeah.
Good advice. Well, I think we captured the couple of questions that came through. So ladies, any parting thoughts when it comes to investing and getting involved with companies at this early stage of their development? Anything that you would share with our ladies before we kind of wrap up for the day?
Well, first, let me answer the question that was just posed, which is there a newsletter in Baltimore? I would suggest joining Next Gen Venture Partners. If you're interested in Baltimore specific, there's newsletters for Upsurge Baltimore, for Conscious Venture Lab, for Latimer Ventures, for Blue Venture Investors, and a variety of things at University of Maryland. So if I can't, I'll see if I can put it into the chat right now, but under today.umd.edu, there's all sorts of information about their entrepreneurship work going on at University of Maryland. Those would be the Baltimore ones that I would probably start joining, and then more national would be Gangels. And then, there's a bunch of competitors to Gangels. And just starting to receive newsletters is going to get you more up to speed, and you'll start finding things that you find interesting.
And reading some of the local publications technically is a great one. And go back to your own alma mater, regardless of where that is. I can guarantee you they have an opportunity in a newsletter.
Yeah.
Terrific. And ladies, if participants, if there's any other questions that are out there, definitely feel free to put them in the chat. So, I mean, this has been great, certainly very helpful. And it's good to know that there are some of those types of resources out there for our ladies to at least start getting some continual information on this space if they're interested in getting more and more involved.
Yeah. And I think in terms of parting thoughts, I would probably say, there are a lot of resources available. There are so many people that would really like your investment dollars. They would really like your professional services support. They would love your advice. And please don't start from scratch. Don't create your own fund. There's a jillion funds, and there's a lot of ways, do not recreate the wheel. There's a ton of different deal docs to get started. This is really, it's a delight that there's so many people who are interested in this conversation. I didn't realize there were, because we're constantly trying to find more investors. The one group I failed to add, but suggest you all look at, is Citrine Angels, CITRINE Angels. They're more in the DC area, but it's female-led, female-founded, female investors investing in female-founded companies.
Terrific.
And they meet on a regular basis. Again, in the DC area, sometimes in Columbia, they're not Baltimore focused, just to be very clear. But they have lots of information sessions and lunch and learns about a lot of the stuff we've talked about today.
And I would say that, get started early. I spend a good portion of my time advising and making introductions for early stage entrepreneurs because they need those resources. They need to talk to people like you that are on this call. You have a lot to offer. So I would start there and don't expect a unicorn first one out of the gate, but be prepared for a loss and be prepared for a long wait to get that money back. But it's also very rewarding. There's nothing more exciting than seeing a company you've helped in some way really hit their inflection point and start doing really, really well. It's very exciting and rewarding.
That I can speak to as well from our experience through Innovation Works. That truer words were never spoken, Mary. Thank you for that. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Mary and Claire, thank you so much for being resources.
Thank you for organizing, Susan.
Yes, for our very first webinar here on investing in emerging companies. To let everyone know, we will be posting a replay of today's webinar on our Executive Alliance YouTube channel, so stay tuned for that. And just say, have a great rest of your week and have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. Thanks, ladies.
Happy Thanksgiving,
Take care.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.